nose, hold for a moment, and then breathe out your mouth slowly. Feel your hands in your lap. Breathe in deeply through your nose, hold for a moment, and then breathe out. Feel your feet on the ground. Breathe in deeply through your nose, hold for a moment, and breathe out. Slowly open your eyes and breathe normally. Welcome back. Next slide, please. When it comes to technical help, Nick is the go-to person. Please note that his phone number and his email are there on the screen just in case you need it later. We will be recording the entire meeting. What you say is part of the public record. The recording will be made available for public review next week. To find out more information about the project, please go to OregonTolling.org. Community members, you are welcome to email your public comments to us at oregontolling@odot.state.or.us. Next slide, please. As we move through our meeting today to take next steps forward with our mission of planning for equity, let's recall our working together agreements. Listen, believe, and reflect. Accept non-closure for the moment. Speak your own truth with compassion. Listen to understand. Don't listen to respond. Value and celebrate each other's experiences. Open hearts plus open minds equals exploration of possibilities. Make space, then take space and be concise. Bring your best thinking into this room. Attack the problem, not the person. Disagreement, frustration, and differences of opinion are acknowledged, explored, and addressed. Next slide, please. So let's talk about where we're headed today. As we have communicated before the meeting, our proposed meeting outcomes include taking this next step forward on your Equity Mobility Advisory Committee recommendations to the Oregon Transportation Commission on transit and multimodal policies and strategies. Our goal is to be halfway to complete recommendations. Secondly, we will provide direction to ODOT on transit and multimodal performance measures to guide the project development today. So really our guiding question is, how do we, the Equity Mobility Advisory Committee, help develop a toll program with tangible, equitable investments? Next slide, please. So here's our agenda for today. We're going to set the table with the equity framework step 1 and comments posted to the response matrix. Next, we'll have our meal, our main course, and that will be transit and multimodal policy recommendations, strategy recommendations, and performance measure changes. Then we'll hold space for public comments and committee report outs, and then we'll close. With that, I'll hand it over to Garrett.
Thank you. So again, like Jessica was saying, we're going to stick with our food analogy here. So setting the table, what's that structural piece? Next slide. So again, all the work, thanks to you all, is grounded in the equity framework. We're really trying to build upon that. And really the first step is the who, what, and where. And so you'll see in your packet that's included is building upon what you saw last month, getting more definition in our demographic mapping, looking at the transportation analysis. So not just where people live, but where they work, where they're traveling along the corridor. And this is also going to inform the public engagement work. It kind of overlays with the process equity and the public involvement plans that you've seen before. So included in this memo and the packet is what we've heard so far, but know that this is just a touch point and that there are additional kind of circular iterative cycles where we're going back out to these communities, where we're deepening our knowledge of the impact on the I-205 project, but then also at the regional scale. Next slide. And so again, to just reorient ourselves when we're talking about equity, it isn't just a blanket statement. We're going above and beyond what the environmental justice, what's in federally required to identify those same groups, but then also people with disabilities, seniors, children, no vehicle households, and limited or no English proficiency. And so when we talk about equity communities or equity framework identified communities, these are all of the groups we're talking about. And so these are some of the, just an idea of some of the updated maps, again, that we've been bringing to you. Next month, when we get into diversion and neighborhood health and safety, we're going to look at how social resources and places like health centers, environment, or education, how they match up to these communities, and where we want to look at access, either being benefiting or being burdened by the toll system. Next slide. So Jessica, I'll transition it back to you for today's meal. That's the table. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. We have to have at least 1 to 3 of those in every Zoom meeting. So
okay, I've done my 1 of 3.
Yeah.
Thank you. How about next slide, please? So if you take a look at these icons, this is an overview of the process that we're going to go through today. The first step is going back to what we heard. What did we hear from you? The next step is what we heard from you led to the policies that we created. And then the next step is we're going to take a pulse poll to see how close the policies are to completion. And then the next step is we'll have a discussion and say, well, what will move these policies further to completion? And then we'll pulse poll again. So our pulse polls will include EMAC members. This poll will help EMAC to further develop and refine their recommendations and to do what we need to do to focus on EMAC polling results. So we need to focus on EMAC polling results before we invite broader engagement. If members of the public want to share their thoughts about EMAC recommendations, we welcome you to visit OregonTolling.org. There's a link on that site to email ODOT. We hope to receive everyone's cooperation and really keep it to EMAC's voting. And one more piece of housekeeping. Committee members, please note that this is not an anonymous vote. We are not tracking votes to individuals. We just need to ensure that every committee member's vote is counted.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that. When we go through the what we heard, what we're doing about it slides, that's really ODOT's intention of trying to meet those transparency and accountability pieces. And so I'm going to move through those a little bit quickly, but know that that's not to disregard that. I want to leave space for our discussions today. There's a much more detailed accounting within the documents themselves on kind of what we heard specifically, and a more kind of robust response from ODOT about how that was incorporated. So just know that even though we're verbally going to go through those quicker, we did provide more in-depth written response to that. And then the final piece I'll say about this, and it really came through in some of the one-on-one conversations we had with you all, is that we are talking about these in policies, strategies, and performance measures, but there's an intersection between all of this. And so, for example, if your interest is in increasing transit service, how you might see that work is that in the policy realm, that's where it's directing those dollars, the set, dedication for transit. You might see that show up in strategies through that first, like bus on shoulder and increased transit service language there. And then you'll see that furthermore in the performance measures where we're measuring impact to current transit service, or where improvements could benefit it there more at the kind of granular street level. So no, I know it's hard sometimes to think about these things separately, because if you think about the issues or what the investments we actually want, it actually works on all 3 layers in themselves. So I found that helpful and clarifying, and really from the feedback from you all and how we were going through that. Cool. So because Jessica is awesome and has a cool chef partner, I learned this term mise en place as a French term of kind of where we're at in the food making process. And so we've had our last month was, did we get the right ingredients list? And so this month is we've got the ingredients list. We're starting to prep it up. And before we go off and start cooking and forming the foods and enacting that and bringing it back to you, we really need to kind of make sure that we're pursuing the right recipes. And so that's the main part today. If we get to I feel 40% okay with this, that's cool with us. That's kind of where we want to be at a minimum. And so those questions you saw in the recommendations about how is this advancing equity, who is responsible involved, how much money would be available, where are, these are our ideas, what's additional input from the equity, those populations we talked about, what's the more granular path to implementation, could this be ready on day one? We're hoping that after your kind of direction today, that we'll do a deep dive. We'll work with our partners, yourselves, the community, to bring that information back to you before you go to the Oregon Transportation Commission, before you start getting that recommendation prepped up. That'll be in that September, October, November timeframe. So that's kind of, again, kind of where we're at and a bit where we're headed. Next slide. So again, in answering that, where will I see ODOT's commitments to transit multimodal investments? Each one of these are at kind of a different stage in formation, the more chrysalis strategies, the emergent adult butterfly policies, and the more detailed performance measures. Next slide. So we'll start first talking about policies. Again, to remind ourselves, a policy is this statement or rule that's used to guide the decisions and identify actions in pursuit of an outcome such as advancing equity. For those watching in the public, there's some good background documents to how we got here at our last meeting. Next slide. And again, an example of what a policy might look like, you see, and this is queued up, a certain percentage of 25% of net toll revenues are dedicated to transit service. And the example that could be similar to is if you look at the Minneapolis region, their policy is as clear as that. 50% of net toll revenue goes towards transit construction, the other 50 for bus service. Next slide. So Jessica is going to help me here going through some of the what we heard and what ODOT's response to that was.
So what we heard is that you want support for dedicating toll revenue to transit and multimodal transportation options. An emphasis on the and. You want to see dedicated revenue for both transit and multimodal transportation.
So you'll see in the recommendation where there were four types of dedication before, there's really only two. And it's, again, that emphasis, like Jessica said, on the both and piece for active transportation and transit. Next slide.
We heard connect how the money would be spent to community organizations and equity businesses. In other words, direct funding to community organizations and equity businesses to further equity with tolling.
And so in your policy recommendations, there are two specific line items for this. Now, I know there's a lot of details still to be worked out on what is a community based organization, how would they apply for funding? Similarly, with disadvantaged business enterprises, there's a federal requirement that we have to do, but that's really kind of a baseline, and this policy would help push us beyond that. So again, a lot of those questions I would hope we can answer between now and then when your recommendation comes for that.
We heard address the concerns about enforcement, diversion dedication, and rural areas. In other words, have a plan, policy, strategy, and/or performance measures that address equity in enforcement, road diversion, and for rural areas.
And so we're planning to bring the enforcement policies around the affordability and the impact to environmental justice communities in August and September. It'll also be a part of our discussion after the OTC recommendation in November. That November to springtime is looking forward on kind of future decisions. We'll jump into diversion this very next 2 months and looking at impacts to neighborhood health and safety. And then you saw in the analysis, it really does follow the footprint of the project and isn't limited just to the urban growth boundary of Metro. So with that, I'll just remind us, I'll walk us quickly through the policy recommendation documents. Again, that baseline of 40% complete of where we're at. Next slide. So it starts with this statement, being very clear about the dedication of this project and these investments to trauma-informed practices and to advance equity. Next slide. Then there's that kind of just placeholder percentage or dollar amount of net toll revenues towards a combination of the transit and active transportation investments. This is the policy option about the dedication to community-based organizations. Again, it's tying back to the transit and multimodal piece, the meal that we're talking about here. And again, more work to be done on kind of defining and fleshing that out. This is that baseline for disadvantaged business enterprise investment. I kind of left that more broadly written. And as we get more information about this, that can be specified to get clear on that. And I would love for, proposed language and what you've learned through your organizations. In the list of exemptions we talked about, these were the two that really kind of rose to the top as far as transit vehicles, registered van pools, and car pools that would be exempt from paying tolls. And so those are brought forward in the recommendation. And then finally, we were trying to look as far as, is there a preference between highway or non-highway investment? And we heard pretty clearly that there's an interest in a balanced approach, meaning looking at both and for that. And to not choose like a quarter or a half mile to kind of an arbitrary geographic limit from the highway, but really follow the impact of the project. And then that's where investments could be, should be tied to that. So Jessica, I'll transition it back over to you.
Great. Thank you, Garrett, for walking us through the recommendations. So I imagine that most of you have several thoughts, questions, and comments that we'll want to explore about the recommendations. But before we do that, let's take a pulse poll to find out how close are we to a recommendation on transit and multimodal policies. And remember, as Garrett mentioned, that we understand that these are incomplete recommendations, but right now, without discussion, let's rank how close we are to develop the EMAC policies. Thanks, Nick. So if everybody can just take a quick minute to go ahead and cast their vote, let's poll. And just a friendly reminder, as mentioned earlier, this poll is for EMAC committee members and for members who are joining us by phone, please unmute yourself and let us know your vote. Okay, so I'm going to give it one more minute. For members of the public that want to share their thoughts, please visit OregonTolling.org for more information. So, Nick, why don't we wrap up the poll now? Wow. Okay. So it looks like we're almost in our range of 41 to 60%. 44% of the people, of the team members, think that we're there. But we've got some other people that have other thoughts. So Nicole, can you pull everybody up on screen? Great. So thank you all for that. Maybe what I'd like to do, it looks like some of us, about 40% of us, think that we're in the 40 to 60% range of completion, but there are some people that think we're in the 0 to 20%. So let's take a few minutes to talk about that. We have about 10 minutes for a conversation. I think I'd like to talk to or hear from one of the members that feel like we're in the 0 to 20% range and see what your thoughts are. Please raise your hand, either your real hand or your Zoom hand. Michael, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody, and good to see you all. So yes, I was somebody who voted in the 0 to 20%, And I am, really excited about the direction that it's going and these policies. But I think a critical piece that I'm still concerned about is like in the first two bolded statements when it talks about net toll revenues. I just still, feel this sense, it's a theme I've brought up before, but net toll revenues still, to me, makes me think about like what is really going to be left after, bonds are serviced and paid for. And so it's like, to me, that is really sort of cutting into the integrity of this. Cause like I am really, liking a lot of what we've discussed, and I think it's going there, but just sort of the basis of like, what's going to be available, and also just thinking through like the time scale as well. Like, are bonds going to be paid for like 10, 20, or 30 years? And then like, at what point is there actually going to be some substantial, funding that can go towards these, a lot of what we talked about was supporting multimodal investments in transit. And so that's just, something that keeps coming up in my mind. And I think too, I've heard from folks here in this virtual room that, we need safety improvements and multimodal improvements to really get going, now or ahead of tolling, or really as a complementary strategy and not something that comes later down the line. So that's just, that's where I'm at, but I'm really excited about, seeing where we're going with this. So thank you.
So Michael, thank you for that. I just want to clarify. So the first point is definition around net toll revenue. Like what does that mean? And maybe more transparency around that.
Yeah, and I think it would be useful to see like what is it that is committed in like those operational, components, like that is sort of subtracted from all revenues. And then like, I think that would help at least me feel more aware of like, what is going to be left or potentially be left.
So seeing the components and a clear definition of what does net revenue mean. Okay, and then you had a second point of the pre-multimodal strategies before tolling opens. Was that the other?
Yeah, and that was really, echoing what I've heard and heard from community too about like, day one, like when tolls are enacted, like what other options are available from the get-go?
Okay, I love that. And I'm seeing that James is agreeing with both of your points. And I imagine that there might be some other members that share this concern. I think, would anyone else like to share on the comments that Michael has made?
I think Kari and Dr. Wu have their hands up.
Oh, great. Sorry, I've not seen. Okay.
Oh yeah,
great.
No worries at all.
How about if we go Dr. Wu and then Kari? Okay.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks. And I'm going to piggyback on to Michael's comment and perhaps even reinforce a couple of things. First of all, I think, defining what net revenue means is extraordinarily important, both for transparency purposes, but also for prioritization, meaning that if the costs of doing tolling include the basic programmatic costs, including infrastructure and all of that stuff, and it includes paying back bonds, then that's a very different kind of situation than if the costs are restricted to just the costs of creating, setting up, and running the program. Bondholders are another category, and then actual investments are yet another category. But if bondholders are lumped into costs, and if costs come first, then that basically means bondholders take priority over EMAC communities. And I think that's exactly the wrong message to send. Finally, if we say a percentage of net revenue is what's going to go to transit and active transportation, and let's just say for arbitrary purposes, that's 30%. Well, 30% of gross revenues is an entirely different picture from 30% of net revenues after bondholders are paid. But to the public, it's going to look like a great deal. But in the end, it's not going to be such a great deal, and people are going to feel cheated. So that's where the both transparency and the prioritization issue come in. So, do what you want, but be very transparent about it, as opposed to sort of almost what seems like a bait and switch kind of arrangement. Thanks.
Thank you, Phil, for your comments. And I think I'm going to go right to Kari because I think it's pretty clear what you're saying. Kari, would you like to unmute?
Thanks. Yeah, and I'm going to just similarly echo what Dr. Wu and Michael had to say. I think they both very precisely and eloquently said a lot of the things that I'm concerned about as well with this. I feel like it's definitely headed in the right direction, but there's just a lot of outstanding questions that I think without clarity and detail at this point, I would not feel comfortable moving forward. Questions around how much will that be? I think one of the things that I think about in terms of policy direction is the current direction around highway trust funds that split 50-30-20 between ODOT, counties, and cities. And I wonder if that's something that we could put onto this that would help to provide clarity. And I think that would also help to provide the OTC with clarity when they get to the point of setting tolls and looking at what that looks like. Then they would have a sense of exactly how big they need to make that and what they need to make that look like. So that's one thing that I've been thinking about. I also had a question about, I think we talked about this last time, but if there would be a local share or local option for cities and counties from these revenues, whether there would be something that, who is spending this money? Is it all ODOT directed? Or is there an opportunity for cities and counties to say, to receive a certain amount of these funds and then spend them, with direction, but on projects that they want to and deliver those projects themselves? My second question. And then my third was just a question around, or maybe a clarification around clearly defining multimodal and what exactly that means, because that means something different depending on who you're asking. And so I think that's something that's really important for us to clarify. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you, Kari. So if I can just kind of clarify, the first question was clarity around splitting the funds between highway, transit, and multimodal. Was that?
No, that was around splitting the funds similarly to how the Highway Trust Fund is currently split.
Okay.
So between ODOT, counties, and cities, and it's 50-30-20 is what it currently is.
My apologies. And then the second part of your question is local options, who is spending the money? And the third question is clearly defining what multimodal means. Okay, great. Does anyone else have any more comments connected to Kari or Dr. Wu's or Michael's statements? You want to raise your hand? Okay, I think with that said, Garrett, do you want to respond to some of these? These feel like more than these are questions, and they feel like more work to do.
Yeah, I've got a couple of thoughts. I've been thinking about this. I wonder if we remove the word net from the recommendation, if that's a way we can, if that would help address some of the concerns that, and I hear what you're saying as far as like putting the transit and multimodal investments on same par and a same timeline as far as delivery as highway capacity projects and investments might be there. So that's just a thought I had as far as like maybe a quick edit now, because I think a lot of the work on defining what is the net toll revenue. I'm getting some pictures in my mind of information I can bring back to you on how that works and those different buckets, because it is similar to how Dr. Wu explained, is that there's certain dedicated buckets and requirements if highway bonding is met that are included in that. Now, I think one of the reasons why the language read the net toll revenue piece was honestly just based on what I have seen as examples from other locations. It's a pretty common thing to have that net toll revenue at the policy level, but there are other like language that goes around those agreements that talks about how it's done. Specifically, the Minneapolis example. There's some additional language in there about how that's delivered kind of on day one or on par with the highway, that you're not waiting to 15 to 20 years before the bonds are paid back. So I wonder if there's like language I can bring back to you that kind of is a little more detailed that gets to that piece. And then the other way it's also accomplished is, so for example, in Hampton Roads, instead of like trying to gauge a percentage or take a guess, there's just a committed schedule of like annual contribution pieces. And that's worked into that like revenue model piece of it. So I guess to say like there are definitely avenues and paths for these. I'm wondering today what kind of, I guess for this group, are there additional edits to the statements as they're written that we can make that kind of get our support to move forward? So I guess that's a question. And then finally, the thought around who is spending this money. Is it a 50-30-20 split, that type of piece? That's again, I think because we added a policy recommendation that directed money to CBOs or DBEs. That could be something that this committee proposes, that there's a, weighing in on your thoughts on opinions about if there's a specific dedication for like local governments as a part of that as well. So again, that's something I know we'll get to in the future, and we're going to bring back more language on. I'm wondering, is that something you want included today, in the recommendation piece of it?
Let's start with the first question, which is, how do members feel about removing the word net from revenue? Does that seem like, is that a thumbs up? And does
I think that's a start.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And then of course, the next step will be perhaps being more specific about, what defines costs. And then the third step will be actually coming up with those numbers, the percentages or dollar figures.
Okay, great. And then Garrett, the second question you had was, were you
around Kari's allocation? Yeah, I'm wondering how that works into this.
I'm not sure if off the top of my head I have a quick edit for that, but maybe that's what we do some work on, where we really focus. Oh, Abe, do you have a thought?
I have a different thought that's kind of related but not specific to that. So why don't you finish that thought, and then I can chime in after.
Sure. So okay, well, I think Kari, we're going to get back about how we address the allocation. So, okay. Ready to move on. Abe, you got a minute.
Yeah, so this is just generally related to language tweaks, and I'm curious. So I voted in the 20 to 40%. I'm at about 36, I think, maybe somewhere in that range. And I appreciate the mise en place language that I learned today, and the food metaphor, which I think I can riff on a little bit. And I think part of this is it's still early in the conversation. We have a lot of unknowns that we're going to be wading through over the next 5 months. And part of it is if we're putting together our main meal, we don't know what the appetizer really looks like. And so that I see as the mitigations that are going to be coming through with the NEPA process, and what they are addressing and how much they cost. And we also don't know the kind of like the dining scene that we're delivering our meal into. We don't know what that context will look like once it gets from the kitchen to the dining table. And so we don't know actually what we're going to need to sort of with it, or what we're going to pair it with, and all those things. So I'm curious if there's a language change around just using the word recommendation seems really strong at this point, since we're having some meaningful conversations around it right now. If this is more like policy and strategy options that we're going to continue to refine over the next 5 months, and then in September we're moving towards more final recommendations. If that's an option at all, and what the group thinks about that.
I think those are great comments. I think I'd love to hear it from other members, but I think before we, Park, were you going to respond to Abe, or did you have some other thoughts?
I was going to respond to the previous comments.
Okay. Well, why don't we do this? We'll get back to you. I think, Abe, I think we are going to refine. We just wanted to find out where we were right now in time with recommendations. And we hear you. We're, Phil says we're building an outdoor restaurant. It could be a guerrilla pop-up. We're somewhere in between. But we're trying to move forward, and we'll also continue to have these conversations. Like the next one is going to be neighborhood health and safety with the same format and the same approach: policy, strategy, performance measures, and then affordability and EJ. And I think as we move through, there's still going to be things that are happening with transit and multimodal that will settle down and will fine tune. So this is only a first poll, a pulse, a temperature of where we are right now with transit and multimodal, mostly because we do have to get somewhere by September, but we need to know where we are now for how much work we need to do before September. Does that help?
Yeah, and I think maybe to summarize and reframe too, I think our raw ingredients to me don't feel like recommendations. They feel more just like starting points for digging into these topic areas of the kind of the 8 different policies and strategies that we have listed. So we know we're going to learn a lot over the next 5 months and gather more perspectives and input and analysis and studies that will help inform how those policies and strategies actually end up on the table. That's
great. No, that's perfectly clear. Okay. Yeah, right. They're raw. It's rough. Well, I don't know if do we think that's a document edit at this point? Garrett?
I'm landing on that's just a friendly understanding, because you're correct, Abe. Like the positioning of this is more of a working document options at this point, and we're working towards recommendations. I think we used the recommendation title and we tried to make it look like a final product, just in the sense of getting you kind of normalized on what that final product's going to look like. And so, but yeah, the posture of the document is exactly how you described.
And James, I'll get to you in a moment. Can you hold that thought? I'm going to go to Park, but I'll do Park first and then James. Thank you. Park?
Thank you. I don't disagree with any of the previous speakers. It's things we should remain concerned about. I was more optimistic because many of the things we're talking about are very low cost, even the ones that are more than low cost are minimal compared to building miles of highway. So I'm convinced if we come up with good recommendations, that we can convince ODOT that money can be found regardless of whatever comes out of the polling specifically, or tolling specifically.
That's great. Thank you. I think because of time, I'm going to move to James. I think you had your hand up next.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'll make this really quick. I was in that 20 to 40% group. And the reason why I was in that group is because the fact that we've actually got something on paper that we're able to react to, and that's a big step forward. And the fact that we have a channel to give this input, I think we have to give some credit to that. And now I think the responsibility between staff and ourselves here is how we build that out. And I really like all the ideas that people have brought, but now we have to kind of think about what does that actually look, and how can we actually bring these dynamic ideas and find their way to paper. And I think there's a lot more analysis on the numbers and so forth, just like everything we've talked about, but I do appreciate that we actually have something to work from.
Thank you, James. And I don't know if I see anyone else's hands up, but I would like to move us to the next part of the meeting, if that's okay.
Amanda has her hand up.
Go, Amanda. Sorry, my apologies.
Oh, that's all right. So I think back to the question, the piece that Abe raised and the question about, is that a document change? For me and my organization, I think if we were talking about strategies at this point and not necessarily recommendations, that I think that might be a better conversation. And part of that, for me, part of that is about that these are strategies and there are a lot of unknowns, and I don't, I'm not foodie enough to get into the metaphor component of this. But I think like part of me is thinking, well, we are, these the nuance of some of the language that we're talking about right now, like net, not net, percentage, apportionment or whatever, however we talk about that, like to me, that feels further down the road and at a different level of granularity than sort of these broader things that we can talk about, which I would consider strategies, because we have so many unknowns still. And so does it warrant a document change? I kind of feel like, yes, that would make my life easier, but that doesn't necessarily, I mean, I would go with the group on that, because I think recommendations sound strong and we're not there yet. I mean, that's months down the road. I think, to me, it feels like we have strategies that we want to see. We have ways that we want equity to be included. We need to know from ODOT, like how much of this is possible or, feasible or realistic, I think, too. So my 2 cents.
Well, thank you for that. Those are all really good thoughts and expected of all you all. You push us and it's great. So I think why don't we do this now? Let's try to take another quick poll. Nicole, can we go to slide, I think it's 29. And let's ask you this. If this is our homework, you've given us our homework of what we need to do to move closer to a recommendation or a strategy or what we're going to do next in this process. Let's take a quick poll to see where, if we come back with some more homework in the next meeting or in the next couple of months, would we be in the 40 to 60% range of completion? Maybe, maybe not, but let's just take a quick poll and see what you all think, and if anything's changed from the first poll to now. So there's your polling. We'll give you a minute. Yeah, let's see where we're at now. Okay. All right, let's wrap up the poll. And let's see what our results are. Okay, so 46%, we moved the needle a little bit. All right, well, we've got some homework to do. This is really helpful. All right, well, why don't we do this? Let's move to strategies, because we want to have a good conversation about the strategy recommendations. And I'll pass it over to Garrett now.
Sure, definitely. And yeah, it could be a very friendly amendment to call these options instead of recommendations. As far as the document title, I could see that easily being a place there. So the strategies, just to reorient ourselves, these are even a little bit messier than policies at this place right now. But it describes a process or a specific investment that is informed by the analysis, but goes above and beyond kind of what is defined as mitigation. Next slide. So a good example of strategies, if you haven't got to take a look at the Get Moving 2020 transportation package that was put together, they have a really good idea around, they did a good job of framing up kind of systematically improvements that would be needed along a transportation corridor. And so an example from the toll project could be to address pedestrian safety capacity improvements in downtown Oregon City, Canby, Gladstone, and West Linn due to increased diversion. Next slide. So I believe Nicole is going to help me out with what we heard, what we're doing about it.
Yeah, thanks, Garrett. So the what we heard here was centering equity, and we need more information about how that is actually done.
So similar to what you saw in the strategies document, we've included the grounding language around trauma-informed care and that statement up front. I'm now just reacting also to what the discussion we had, and maybe if we are talking about day one commitments, that could also, I see that might be a place where we can add that language as well. Next slide.
So this one, support for bus on shoulder, but it can't be done alone. So looking at pairing that, maybe enhanced transit or other items.
Exactly. And so we really took a lot, this idea was kind of described in a couple of different places. And so in the strategy recommendation, we consolidated that and highlighted some of the key elements as far as neighborhood or that first to last 5 mile connection that we heard about in the workshop as examples of necessary components to complement bus on shoulder.
Then prioritizing capital investment to support transit and multimodal safety and service.
So this option was added and called out specifically in your recommendations. And where this moved was we talked about, because a lot of times in the multimodal world, there's money put towards communications or education. But we heard that this from this group that capital investment is a real need.
And creating an integrated and easy to use fare system is important.
And so this is a goal that is explicitly in our project to work on. And so we just need to continue to work with our mobility service partners on that. And we'll dive deeper into this in our August and September EMAC meetings.
Identify a process for accountability and outreach. So really looking at what the long-term process is for those things.
And exactly, that's not only just through our outreach and establishing and maintaining and enhancing relationships, but here specifically at EMAC, we'll delve into more of those questions in that November to next spring timeline on oversight, accountability, toll rate setting pieces.
And then some other topics that came up around, ferry service and needing to educate on these items. And then, perhaps no highway investments, new parallel roads, and then also electrification, natural gas conversion of diesel vehicles.
So these are all interesting and valid ideas. I think the process for them now, we're proposing that those are moved more to the community engagement world. And as you're kind of building back up towards the OTC in November, if some of these ideas, if we get some really strong community feedback for those, we'll bring them back to you. But the attempt to kind of not include them on the gold sheet was just to help prioritize kind of energy and emphasis on some of those strategies that seemed like were pretty common and fluid throughout. So here, I'll walk you quickly through the strategy recommendations or strategy options document. So it starts off again with that slide, that kind of statement at the above about trauma-informed practices and the equity framework commitment. This is the wording on the kind of both and the bus on shoulder vision and pursuing that, but making sure it's tied to mobility hubs and those key elements of that mobility as a service, increased transit service, ADA access and safety. And one of the edits that is proposed that you don't see here on the document is pursuing the housing and jobs development, but making sure that that's affordable housing included in there and not just kind of, additional market rate. This is the language around the prioritization of capital investments, and that in areas that are impacted by the project, again, following the impact of the project and not an arbitrary geography line, looking at capital investments and improvements. And then this final piece, again, we have language, other parts of the toll project and our goals and objectives. But what I really liked about this recommendation is that it included some of the examples that we brought up. So the bike, scooter, carpooling, car sharing. It kind of, get to Kari's point, it better defined kind of multimodal in that, which I think is a key element and something we should do. And it also talked about that interoperability across state lines and how that might work. So Jessica, I'll transition it to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Garrett, for walking us through the strategy recommendation. So just like before, we know you have, let's do this quickly. We'll take a pulse to see what you think about the strategy recommendations as they are now. So let's poll. Are we in a 0 to 20% range, a 20 to 40%, 40 to 60, 61 to 80%, or 81 to 100% completion range? All right. I'm going to give it one more minute. Okay, let's go ahead and wrap up the poll. Okay, that's great. So Nicole, why don't we pull everybody back up on screen and let's talk about this. So it looks like 46% of you think that we're in the 21 to 40% completion range for the strategies. Would anyone like to share their thoughts about what they voted and why they voted and what they're thinking? Go ahead and raise your hand, or raise your Zoom hand or your real hand. I'm not seeing any hands. Okay, thanks, Park. I've got a hand.
I just wanted to compliment you on verbally fixing the problem with the percentages having duplicates.
You're welcome. I think it's a team effort here. Any other thoughts about the strategies? Kari?
Thanks. Just a couple of questions. I think it's similar to before, just sort of looking for a little bit more clarity. I wanted to know or prod you toward who is leading on that regional transit vision that you're talking about there. Is that an ODOT-led process? Is that led by the transit agencies? Is that led by Metro? What does that look like? I was definitely going to ask about affordable housing, so thank you for that note. And what else? Oh, I did have a question about, I know there's some restrictions in the constitutional restrictions from the Highway Trust Fund around facilities that are not in the right of way. And so that was my question was, what about end of trip facilities like secure bike racks, shelters at schools, or workplaces or main streets? Is that something that would be eligible here, or is that something that could be in that sort of cost, or what do we call it, like where, the sort of moving money around thing to make something like that possible? So just wanted clarity around that.
Great questions, as usual. Anyone else have any thoughts around what Kari just mentioned? Who's leading the transit vision, affordable housing, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kari, please, and the constitutional restrictions, if there's monies that are going to be going to other types of transportation support, like shelters and schools and some of the things that you mentioned. Any other comments from other members?
I see Michael and Abe just raised their hands.
Thank you. Okay.
Oh no, team effort.
So, well, let's go Michael and then Abe. Is that okay?
Thank you. I just wanted to, echo what Kari was saying, and when I engage with community and hear feedback, like secure bike parking is a really big component to people having that option to bike. And so like I know that's like really getting in the weeds, but I just want to echo the support for if it's possible to have funds be flexible enough to meet needs so people can be well well served. It would be frustrating if there are certain restrictions that isn't really helping us get towards our goals. So I'll just end there. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you for that. Abe?
Yeah, so to kind of, I think my raw ingredients on recommendations thought still applies in this section. And to kind of build on the transit vision piece, I think an important component of that is that all the transit providers and within our region are included in developing that vision and in that work, and looking at creating an integrated and easy to use fare system, making sure that includes all local transit providers within the 205 corridor. And then just some general thoughts and questions that I think will come out in further analysis, but just how the Get Moving 2020 projects align with what we'll be seeing as far as diversion and impacts along the I-205 corridor. And if the intent of this is to just leverage good work that's already been done to identify needs in the area and push forward capital improvement projects that have already been identified, is the core intent of this notion to get our day of implementation strategies out the door.
Great input. And I think because of our timing, the three of you have raised really good questions. Garrett, I'd like to pivot to you to see how you'd like to respond.
Yeah, I mean, so future transit vision, who leads? It's a good question. I think it's partly identifying need now, and through what Abe said, it's going to be done in coordination with our partners, with the big transit providers, the TriMets, the C-Trans, down to the SMARTs, Canby Area Regional Transit, others like that. Metro has a regional transportation plan that happens the next few years. TriMet's going to get a new general manager soon. ODOT has a public transportation agency that's looking at statewide transit strategy. So I think the players are there. I think from this group, just identifying the need would be a really helpful impetus to then kind of further those conversations and figure out kind of who's doing what and where. I know additionally, like ODOT is working with SMART currently for a bus on shoulder in the 205 area between Wilsonville and Oregon City. And ODOT is working with C-Tran over the not Abernethy, but Glen Jackson Bridge up into Washington on a bus on shoulder study and transit service up there. So there's pieces of it now, but this could help provide that kind of next step forward. Similar answer, I would say, for the constitutional restriction. I think it'd be super helpful to hear the need from this committee, and then we can come back with information on what those delineations are, what falls perfectly kind of within that restriction, what would be outside of it. And then to Kari's kind of recap of our swippy swappy technical term, that could be that, like, well, what are the other paths? How could this get funded then? So I think that's something we can come back to you with. But again, I think for this committee, identifying the need, if it is those bike racks, if it is those off right-of-way investments, let's hear that, and then we'll come back to you with kind of what do those avenues look like. And finally, for the diversion and Get Moving Forward, Abe, you're correct. That's where I think what we'll do is we'll follow where are the impacts, where are we showing kind of additional single occupancy vehicles going into these off highway streets, and we'll zero in then on like what are the existing needs and what are some solutions. And so why, to a certain extent, why I like some of the Get Moving Forward work is that that's already been through some community vetting. There's been some cost estimates, some planning. They've looked at how it connects to local transportation plans. And so those are, if they are kind of a little bit more shovel ready compared to just more conceptual ideas, they get us a little further down the path. And so again, that is kind of just an example of a solution, but it'll be driven by that kind of impacts analysis piece.
Thank you, Garrett. Committee members, do you have any more questions about the strategies?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment I'd like to make. As I'm looking at the Pursue Regional Bus on Shoulder, number 2, the mobility as a service. I would like to dive deeper into that at some point. I don't know if now is the correct time, but it seems like if we're willing to put forth funding to these things, we have a real opportunity to do something creative. And that's beneficial for all. So imagine being able to access all of these services via one app, and not just transit, but local nonprofit services, everything. I think that would be really cool, and it would take us a long way in making transit that comparable to using your own personal vehicle. To make it that easy, remove the barriers. So I'd just like to put forth that comment, and hopefully we can talk about it at some point in the future.
That's
And
great.
I would say, Bill, if where the language stands at now about the interoperability and then that piece in the other strategy, I feel on pretty good ground that we can bring that back to you, that's the path where we're headed. So thank you for voicing that.
Thank you. So I think I'm going to close the conversation unless someone has a burning question or comment. I don't see any fires, so let's move to the next slide, slide 45, Nicole, if you don't mind. So let's take a quick poll with that conversation and with the response from Garrett about some of the work that we still need to do. Let's take the next poll here. Do you support moving forward with this recommendation on strategy, on transit and multimodal strategies? And are we around that 40 to 60% complete range? So go ahead and take the poll, share your thoughts with us. It'll be curious about the results. Those were good comments. Thank you so much for the conversation and the discussion. Okay, Nick, do you think we can wrap the poll now? Oh, okay. So that's great. So I think this is so helpful with the conversation, with the understanding that we're going to do some of the homework that you've already pointed us in the direction to do. We're in a this is fine place. So I say that's about 40 to 60%. Okay, great. Well, thank you, everyone. This was a great conversation. I'm going to pass it over to Garrett at this point.
Yeah, and so what I think I might do, if it's okay with the group, is I'll set up the performance measures. I might skip the what we heard, what we're doing about it part, just because it's pretty lengthy for that, and jump to the NEPA scuba team so those members can talk about that. Because I just want to leave enough space for public comment in the report out. Is that okay with the group? Okay. Hearing no. Okay. So performance measures, again, these are the most detailed or fleshed out piece at this point. And really their connection is to that mitigation, kind of those more incremental improvements in the project that are tied to the environmental analysis and impact from the toll project. Next slide. So again, this just reorients us to, in the NEPA world, in the National Environmental Policy Act world, where our performance measures, and they really they're the leaves that stem out from the purpose and need, the goals, objectives, and of the structure itself. So an example you see here could be, due to the increased diversion from tolling on I-205, this specific intersection needs additional right turn lane, and sidewalk because of the impact of tolling. So if we could jump to the I know the robot probably interested folks. We can come back to that if needed. But if we could jump to the scuba slide. Jessica, back to you, or I think we were going to open this space for folks who did meet in our NEPA scuba team to deep dive into the performance measures, to share any experiences or thoughts on that, how that discussion went.
Yeah, let's open it up to our NEPA scuba team members. Would you like to give us a brief update? Anyone can jump in and unmute yourself when you're ready. Should we call on someone? Put someone on the spot. Abe?
I don't have any thoughts really, and I'm racking my mind to remind myself of that conversation. I can comment that image, I have a slight water aversion, so that image of being deep down underneath makes me a little anxious. But I mean, what we did was, as a group, we walked through both what ODOT heard and the changes that were made in the performance metrics document. What really stuck out to me was the additions and changes that were made to look at breakdowns by mode when possible, and then also by race, ethnicity, and the other categories that we're looking at to be able to disaggregate performance metrics when possible, and understand disparities between the outcomes that we're evaluating. That's, I think, my 2 cents. I don't know if I could toss it to Phil or James, who are also, if they had any recollections from the process. Or Park was there as well.
Exactly.
Bringing the team on board.
Absolutely. Reinforcements. Phil, James, Park, Phil?
Well, I don't think I really have anything to add. I think I'm sort of in the same boat as Abe. I'm sort of racking my brain to try to remember some of the details, but I think my impression was being able to really almost go line by line and sort of carefully look at those measures and how they connected, and then being able to suggest modification. But I quite frankly can't recall specifics at this point. So that's it. for what it's not worth.
No, we appreciate your comments. I think one thing that was interesting for me is that the performance measures are happening in real time.
Yeah.
So, right. So that the NEPA scuba team members are talking about performance measure changes, and they go directly to the artery of the project team to consider and toil over. So I think that's helpful to think about.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just jump in real quick. I think one of the things I really appreciated in looking at the latest transit multimodal policy and strategy recommendations with quotes document is some of the things from the conversation are here, and we are being listened to. So like the volunteer driver stuff, increasing support for volunteer drivers. I see it in this document. I see Portland's golden transportation wallet. So moving forward, these really good ideas and making sure that they're captured was appreciated, as well as not limiting the effects of tolling to a certain geographical area, as already has been mentioned, but actually looking for where the effects will be and then trying to meet those. Thank you.
Thank you. That was awesome, Bill. Thank you. Any other thoughts about the NEPA scuba team or performance measures work? Okay, seeing none, I think we'll move to the next slide, please. Okay, great. We're at the public and comment committee report out period of our meeting. Next slide, please. So welcome everybody from the public. This is our time for verbal comments to the committee. Members of the public, if you would like to address the committee, please raise your virtual hand. If you're on the phone and want to raise your hand, please use *9. So Nick, can you help me out and let me know if there are any raised hands?
Yes, we do have 2 individuals that have raised their hands. And so first we will go to RJ Shepherd. RJ, I'm going to allow you to talk, and you should see a notification in just a second.
And RJ, you'll have 2 minutes. Welcome.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, and especially all of the volunteers here that are spending so much time researching these great topics. My name is RJ Shepherd. I am the co-chair of BikeCloud PDX, but today I'm speaking on my own behalf. I do want to first ask the committee to, I would say, get some harder numbers about what additional funding can come through these tolling projects, and whether what the comparison would be if we didn't actually build some of these projects versus doing tolling first. I think this is a really important thing to note, is that the bond revenue, or sorry, the bonds have to be paid off first. And so if we're underwater from the get-go, none of this work that you guys are doing, which is brilliant, means anything. So I think that's going to be the most important thing, is to get some hard numbers from ODOT. Second, I want to also point out, we haven't really heard a lot about rail transit. So Amtrak service from downtown Portland to downtown Vancouver is only 16 minutes, even at peak driving times. But we only run 4 trains per day there. So what could we do to increase service there? You know, can we work with WashDOT and see if we can run the current train sets along with the new Amtrak train sets that we're getting, for example? Can we determine some additional right-of-way to also acquire for double tracking all the way from downtown Portland to Oregon City, which would allow us to run much faster headways down to Oregon City and then also Salem as well. And last, I want to point out also using multimodal level of service as a performance measure, I think is a very good baseline for all of the projects moving forward, which Oregon, or ODOT, I should say, already has experience using. So multimodal level of service addresses both pedestrian and bicycling, but also transit as well. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, RJ. I appreciate your comments.
And next, Jessica, we have Paul Edgar. Paul, I'm going to go ahead and allow you to talk, so you should be able to unmute yourself momentarily.
Hello, I hope you can hear me. My name is Paul Edgar. I'm from Oregon City. I've been involved for over 30 years in transportation decision-making on a lot of committees, including the Clackamas County Transportation System Plan. The diversion that will occur by putting tolling on the Abernathy Bridge will quadruple the incidence of travel on the old Oregon City Bridge and highly disrupt all traffic on a strategic urban freight route of Highway 99E, and could disrupt hundreds, maybe even thousands of jobs, and virtually bankrupt a lot of communities and businesses, such as all of downtown Oregon City. So when we get into mitigation, how do you mitigate when there's only one bridge that services the great majority of all transportation when I go south of the Selwood Bridge? And when I get into I have to go north a long ways, and the only way across. So we're landlocked with the Willamette River, and we don't have options. So we're very, very nervous that there is not any adequate mitigation that can take place that will effectively eliminate the problems that will result directly from tolling the Abernathy Bridge and the I-205 corridor, which has been in itself is critically needed with full capacity, so we don't push traffic onto I-5 through intercity Portland.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Edgar. Nick, do we have any other members of the public that would like to speak?
Not at this time. If you want to give it just a couple seconds and see if there's anybody that raises their hands, but at this time, that's everyone.
Okay. Well, while we're giving that a moment, if committee members would like to consider anything that they would like to share with us about what they've been hearing from their communities, that will be next up. Anyone like to share about what's going on in your communities? I am not seeing any hands right now.
And it looks like no members of the public have raised their hands either, Jessica. So I think we're good there.
Okay, great. All right. Well, let's move to our next slide then. And thank you, members of the public. That concludes our public comment period. And one more note, please note, any comments can be sent to Oregon's website, or ODOT's website, sorry. At any time, you can email oregantolling@odot.state.or.us, or you can call 503-837-3536 and leave a voicemail. And thank you both for your comments today. We greatly appreciate them. So next up, let's, earlier this month, EMAC members presented to the Oregon Transportation Commission. Amanda, James, and Phil, would you like to do the honors and talk about your experience there?
Well, this is Phil. I'll start off and say that it was a lot of fun. I think we had a well put together presentation, and I think the key point was to indicate to the OCT just how grounded our work was in an equity framework. And so, we walked through the whole concept of trauma-informed care, and well, I should say trauma-informed perspective. And I think that was very important to make clear to the OTC that this really sort of forms the basis for how we are approaching our work and how we would approach any communications around our work. And I think one of the OTC members, I can't remember names, has specifically commented on their appreciation for this whole notion of referring to the trauma-informed perspective. So I think, to me, that signaled that this resonated with the OTC.
Thank you, Phil. Amanda or James, would you like to chime in at all?
I would just echo what Phil said. I think it went well, and I think that the emphasis on equity and why that's really where we're focusing and what we're doing with the framework and trauma-informed, raising awareness around the importance of that is the big pieces of that.
It's great. Thank you.
Hey, again, I just wanted to say that it was a pleasure working with my colleagues here on the EMAC on this project, and also with staff, because the pulling together the PowerPoint, I think it was really on point, where we had very limited slides, so we were really able to focus on really our message and what we were doing. And so we were able really to talk about, the trauma-informed decision-making and all that, and really talking about the models and stuff that we've put together, because I know that all of us have put a lot of time and energy into that stuff. And so to be able to share that and share it with someone, this is all new information to them, and they really absorbed it from my perspective. So I think that they're, anxious to hear more. And when we were able to show them our roadmap and all of that stuff, I think that we really left an impression with them as to the quality of work that we're doing. And I really appreciate all of us on this committee and the public for their input on this work, because it is important work, because we're going to be talking about this for some time going forward. And yeah, it was a good experience.
Thank you, James. Anyone else?
Can I ask Commissioner Smith what you thought of it, and especially from your perspective as an OTC member?
Sure. Thanks, Phil. I thought it went really well. I thought it was, the focusing on kind of the important slides and the trauma-informed perspective resonated with me. I've been hearing it being on this committee, but I think it was really important for my fellow commissioners to hear it. And I know them, I work with them regularly, and they are very committed to equity. And that's one of our main tenets in the strategic action plan that we adopted. So I think having representatives of this group come and speak was really important, and I think welcomed. And I think it's important to have regular touch points as we go forward. And I was the one who said, let's have a topic on the agenda to talk about it. So I, for one, think it went really well.
Right.
Kudos, everyone. I know we, as project team and staff, thought it was fabulous. So thank you for your work on that presentation and for representing this amazing committee. With that said, we'd like to just leave a little space for the members if you'd like to react or ask questions about the current tolling legislation. I know that moves very quickly, but if you have any thoughts you'd like to share with us, we'd like to leave some space for you to talk about the current legislation. Any takers? I'm going to scroll my screen here and see if I can see any hands. No comments on tolling. I suppose tomorrow we'll have more thoughts about it.
Yeah, and I'll flesh that out for the group. So tomorrow at 8 a.m. At the Joint Transportation Commission, there'll be a work session where they're discussing the tolling legislation. You'll also get a double viewing of Metro presenting their findings to that same body on their congestion pricing study, which was brought to you all. So if you haven't watched a Joint Transportation Commission meeting, this might be a fun little viewing tomorrow at 8 a.m. to start that. And as that meeting video becomes available, or as this goes on the next steps, we'll continue to try to keep you up to date and keep those materials going through that process.
Great. Well, I think we're at the end. And we're at the close. So our next EMAC meeting will be a neighborhood health and safety workshop on June 23rd. Sorry, yes, so Garrett, did you have some comments here? Sorry, I was on another slide.
No, I was going to help you with the date. I was going to jump in there.
Okay.
I guess I would say I want to do this. So I don't like when it's just silence after public comment. So I'll just say a few things to RJ and Paul. Thank you for coming here. And I think the point about transit and Amtrak was pretty interesting. One I hadn't been thinking about. And as we're defining kind of multimodal, making sure that rail is in that ether, is in that concept. So thank you for raising that. And then to Mr. Edgar about the diversion in Oregon City. Yeah, very much a concern for us as well. When we studied and the I-205 project, we looked at 5 options. Options 1 and 2 actually showed the most diversion in downtown Oregon City, and we've asked those not to be moved forward. So we're looking at options that lessen that diversion impact. And then one of the reasons why we're kind of pivoting from just a section of I-5 to that full regional mobility pricing project was due to the idea that just choosing a section of 205 would exacerbate the diversion in that area. And so the hope is that if you pay, no matter where you get on or off the I-5 or I-205 system, that would lessen diversion at certain pinch points, like Mr. Edgard mentioned in Oregon City. So I just needed to say that.
No, I think it's good. Thank you. Well, so then moving forward, our next EMAC workshop will be on neighborhood health and safety. But in thinking about what happened with this meeting, clearly we have some homework to do on transit and multimodal. So we'll huddle after this meeting and we'll get back to you in between the meeting about our next steps around moving closer to the recommendations / options that better reflect the EMAC ultimate recommendations. So next meeting, June 23rd. And we will also have a NEPA scuba team meeting around health and safety performance measures. And then we'll also explore if we have some time to do coordination with the other ODOT equity committees, the Metro and PVOT and TriMet, and maybe even the other ODOT equity projects that are going on. So those are our next steps. Next slide, please. I want to say thank you for all of your time today. Remember to please do your meeting evaluations. They're super helpful for us and our ability to continually improve this meeting for you. Closing thoughts, stay healthy, find peace and harmony and joy and everything that you do. And is there anyone else that has any closing thoughts? We have just a minute here, so I'd love to open it up if anyone else has a closing thought. Okay, I think we just all bought ourselves 2 minutes. Thank you so much. You guys have been great, and we'll be in touch, and we look forward to seeing you on June 23rd for the next EMAC meeting.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone. You have a great day.
Bye.
Thank you.